Welcome to the 3 Down Nation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by two of the finest CFL draft experts in the land, Mr. John Hodge and Mr. JC Abbott. Gentlemen, take a bow. You went through the entire draft, Hodge in written form, JC obviously with our colleague Ben Grant in live stream form with your ugly mugs up there on YouTube. But congratulations on some elite, yes, I said it, elite draft coverage, fellas.
Well, thank you very much for that, Duncan. I would like to apologize to all the people who tuned in to our 4-hour broadcast for subjecting them to my face for that much time. Nobody deserves that, but hopefully the content at least make up for it a little bit.
I think that you guys smashed the broadcast out of the park, and you guys honestly have the much tougher job. I can pre-write almost all of my notes and analysis, and then it just, I'm tweaking it when it comes time to actually post. You guys, the pressure is on. Like 4 hours without a pee break, that in and of itself, extremely impressive.
Well,
but then to have all of it off the top of your head is the other thing. I at least can make my notes, and that makes the written side of it much easier. So huge props to you and to Ben.
Hey, you don't know that we didn't take a peek, right? You don't know what's happening below the camera, guys.
Oh, jeez.
TMI, bro.
TMI.
Hodge, don't give away our secrets, though, man. You write that on the fly. You're like the fastest whiz I've ever seen, taking in information and then being able to provide critical analysis. Like the Usain Bolt of the CFL, if you will, on the keyboard.
Quick.
I appreciate that. And I mean, the goal when it comes to the written stuff is like have the basic info about the player, a pertinent stat or a testing number, whatever. And then on the fly, you add your analysis, right? And it's pretty clear with at least 8 of the 9 teams in the CFL why they're making a given pick. There's one team that had a few head scratchers this year that makes you go, you're drafting a long snapper. You've already got like 4, and it's not a position where teams typically carry more than 1. But anyways, it was a lot of fun. It's one of the most fun nights of the year. And not only is it fun to do, but it's also really fun to, when it's done, go, holy smokes, rookie camp's open in a week. And we actually now have a really good sense post-draft of what these teams look like, where they're going to play their Canadians, what those Canadians might do. So I am thrilled and excited that it happened and that it's done. It's almost time for real football, boys.
Let's go, boys. We're discussing the 2024 CFL Draft in this episode.
Shawn Lemon being suspended for a gambling violation.
4 Canadians being selected in the 2024 NFL Draft.
Football Canada adding a familiar face to its board of directors.
And the Toronto Argonauts finally naming a replacement for Corey Mace. But first,
Chad Kelly and the Toronto Argonauts have filed separate defenses in a lawsuit filed by the team's former strength and conditioning coach. What can you tell us about it, Dunk?
The key to me there is that they are separate defenses. So the Argonauts and Kelly are going about this in their own ways, but the way that the plaintiff filed the case included both the franchise and the player, Kelly in this instance, included in that same lawsuit. So what really jumps out to me is that we're getting I would say, fuller picture here when you have both sides. I know there were some people on the Argo side and Kelly camp who felt like it was really slanted at the beginning of this, but part of that was just the sheer fact that the lawsuit had been filed by the plaintiff, and that was the only real legal information that anybody in the media had to go by. So I do believe this can balance it out, at least in the public's view, but we're going to do what we've done from the start and present the sheer facts. And Kelly, in his statement of defense, denied making any romantic or sexual overtures towards the plaintiff, including workplace harassment. And the 30-year-old stated that he believes she advanced these claims against him purely to draw the attention of the media to what was otherwise a very routine termination situation. That's directly from the document. And Kelly went on to and the full piece is up at 3downnation.com, describe his view of the events surrounding the potential for a group trip to the Buffalo Bills game. So you can get into those details. I think what's really key from both sides here, the Argonauts and Kelly, is the fact that they've asked for this lawsuit to be dismissed. And also both of them have asked for any of the damages to be essentially wiped out from this case. They don't believe they're liable to pay the plaintiff any money. That's more standard law, but it's pretty strong language on their side. So I think the statement that I received from Kelly's lawyer, Nancy M. Shapiro, really rings true here, that the litigation process is underway and they will be following the proper course. So there is still, I would say, some stuff to be played out here, for lack of a better term. And then also, fellas, of course, we're waiting on the league's own third-party independent investigation.
Well, and that to me is the more intriguing story, right? Not to say that this isn't fantastic reporting that you've done, Dunk, but obviously, like, this is a legal issue, or at least it's a civil issue between two parties. And whatever comes of this, I mean, we might never know what comes of this, right? Depending on what type of settlement is eventually reached, if in fact that is what occurs. But to me, the more interesting thing is what is going to come of the CFL's investigation, because at the same time, right, we want a proper investigation that's thorough and, dots all of the I's and crosses all the T's and that. But we also want to know, we're 1 week away from rookie camp. Is Chad Kelly going to be playing this season? Is he facing a suspension? Is he facing an expulsion? Is he going to face no discipline whatsoever? I know our listeners, readers, viewers are asking those questions. We are asking those questions. I have been led to believe that the Chad Kelly investigation is at or certainly near a close, but obviously the CFL has made no announcement regarding their findings or if any supplemental discipline will be taking place. So we're following this story, and we are obviously very intrigued to learn of the conclusion. And as soon as we have that conclusion, we promise that we will bring you that reporting right here at 3 Down Nation.
What's interesting to me about this is not the fact that either of the sides dispute the claims or deny them. I think that's pretty standard in a lawsuit. Otherwise, they would have just quietly settled it at this stage of the case. It's the fact that Kelly and the Argos don't entirely seem to be on the same page anymore. And it should be noted, in his denials, Kelly focused very much on the claims that were put in the newest filing in the plaintiff's lawsuit, which surrounded that Buffalo Bills game and the alleged advances there. He went point by point and refuted all those statements. Everything else he denied simply by saying a blanket denial based on the paragraphs in the initial lawsuit. The Argos focused more on the events that sort of triggered the alleged dismissal, the blow up shortly before the East final, when allegedly the strength and conditioning coach had a private conversation with Kelly that did not go well to address some of the alleged harassment. And then there were things said in the lunchroom with people present. Well, the Argos confirm at least some version of those events did happen. It differs slightly from what the plaintiff painted in her lawsuit, but they confirmed that she did in fact tell people that there was a private interaction between the two of them that didn't go well, and that Kelly said publicly in the lunchroom in front of other people that she wasn't very good at her job as he was leaving, and that she was told that she could go home that day. So they've actually confirmed some elements of this lawsuit that Kelly is still, not admitting to fully. Now, the nature of those is different than how the plaintiff painted them, but it's interesting that these two sides aren't fully aligned right now in my eyes, and that they're going to have to defend their cases in a way that sometimes might come into conflict.
What Hodge laid out is the real key here, fellas, with training camps about to open and the potential of Chad Kelly reporting. There are some people around the league that feel like the head office wants to wait until there is a legal finalization, I guess, for lack of a better term, to this case. But that could take weeks, if not months.
Long time.
So that puts the CFL in a very precarious situation. I guess let's call it what it is. But then you have people that you talk to around the league, and I'm sure all three of us have heard this, that say that players have been released and taken off rosters for much less than what has been alleged against Chad Kelly. And we're still just talking about alleged, and this has nothing really to do with Kelly at this point, but we're just looking at the past in terms of what Randy Ambrosie or teams have done with players who have had events just simply alleged against them that were not as much in the public eye as this is. That shouldn't change anything that you're going to do, I believe, just because of Chad Kelly's star power, or the fact that there's going to be more media attention on this because he's the reigning MOP. But there are people wondering here why the CFL has been so quick in the past and now this time around are taking their time.
Yeah, the reality is they have not set a precedent that what happens in the legal case matters. It doesn't matter if it's criminal or civil or there's no legal ramifications whatsoever. They have acted quickly in the past and made decisions from the top. That has not been what has happened here. And you can debate whether that strategy is ethical or moral, or if it, deserves to be used in a society that values the principles of innocent until proven guilty. We can have those debates elsewhere. The fact of the matter is the CFL has proven that they don't care how the legal case ends up resolving. They're going to make a decision before that. It's telling that they've drugged their feet on this.
The 2024 CFL Draft was held on Tuesday night, with you two analyzing every single pick, all 74, boys. Hodge in written form and JC with Ben Grant on the live stream. You've had a little bit of time to digest the selections. Came fast and furious. Which team would you give the best grade to just mere hours after the dust has settled?
Well, I'm going to go around just a little bit. There's a few picks in particular I really like. I think BC hit it out of the park in the first round with George Una. By the way, it was on this show last week when I said that two players not on the Scouting Bureau rankings would go in the first round. One of them was Ben LaBrosse. The other was George Una. They went 4th and 6th, respectively. Should also be noted that on the Scouting Bureau rankings, some of the players, we said that the top half was legit, which I do still think it was. We also had guys like Anim Donkwa, who was 11th on the Scouting Bureau ranking, fall to, I think it was the 6th round to the Toronto Argonauts. We also had Daniel Johnson, who was ranked 16th, fall to the 5th round to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and guys like Malik Straker, who was number 17, fall to the 4th round to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So if you want the real rankings and you want to cut through some of the smoke screens and the fog, make sure that you check out 3Down Nation for all of your CFL draft needs. But Una, I thought, was a great pick. I thought BC got tremendous value in Christophe Beaulieu, defensive back out of Laval. I think Edmonton smashed the first overall pick in Joel DeBlanco. He was, I think, a no-brainer selection, but he was certainly a great selection. I love that Calgary went bold with Benjamin LaBrosse, who's going to immediately upgrade that secondary. I think Winnipeg was sensational during the second round. I thought Kevin Mattel was an inspired choice for the Toronto Argonauts. I think Nick Mardner was an inspired choice from the Red Blacks, a team that needed to add some firepower to its receiving corps. But the club that I will highlight as having the best CFL draft, in my opinion, is the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They not only got Malik Straker and Daniel Johnson in rounds 4 and 5, respectively, as two guys who I think could potentially develop into good CFL players. Straker did not have a good pro day, but has sensational production from Arkansas State. Daniel Johnson has starts at tackle at Purdue and Kent State. The reason he fell was a litany of knee injuries he's had. But I thought that Del Duncan Busby, slot back out of Bemidji State, was an excellent choice. He is going to allow that team to start 3 Canadian receivers if they want to. And then you've got Kyle Hergel and Nick Weeb in the first 2 rounds. I thought these were bold selections from Jeremy O'Day, an executive who I think at times has been too conservative during his tenure in Riderville. Hergel is, of course, under contract with the New Orleans Saints. Could be a year or 2 before the Riders see him. And Nick Weeb, of course, suffered a torn ACL during the Hardy Cup playoffs with the Saskatchewan Huskies. But he projects as a starter at middle linebacker in the CFL. So when you look at their board, right, I see Hergel as being a Brendan Labatt type addition to that offensive line if he ever reports. I see Weeb as a starter. I see Duncan Busby as a starter. I see Malik Straker as a really good special teams player who's going to help contribute in certain packages on defense. I see Daniel Johnson as being a potential hit if he gets his knees sorted. And then you've also got some decent depth in guys like Deshaun Mims, who's a freak athlete at receiver, just needs to stop dropping as many balls as he did with the Regina Rams. And then also a boomer bust in a Joe, right? Mm-hmm. A guy who tested horribly at the CFL Combine, but was recruited by Clemson coming out of high school for a reason. So I loved what the Riders did. Respect to Jeremy O'Day for not being afraid to roll the dice. And that's why I'm giving them my number 1.
Yeah, the Saskatchewan Roughriders really had an excellent draft. The question is, how much is it going to help them now taking those futures? Are they good enough? I think you can debate that point, but the fact of the matter is they're adding some really, really talented players, and if everything hits, I think they walk away with easily the best draft class here. I'm going to offer another alternative, though, and that's the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I thought they had an absolutely excellent night going in the first round with a bit of a surprise selection at 7th overall. They take an offensive lineman and Nathaniel Dumoulin-Duguay, who we all love here, super athletic mover along the offensive line. The reality is they don't need him right now because of what they have up front with Brandon Revenberg and David Beard and Coulter Woodmansey. But all those guys are A, extremely expensive, and B, I believe they're all on expiring contracts as well. So you get ahead of the curve here. You add Dumoulin-Duguay to your roster alongside a guy who they took last year in Dayton Black, and you potentially have that next round of guys to slot in along the offensive line. I thought that was a fantastic forward-facing move. And then you come back in round 2 and you take who was easily the highest rated player on my board at that stage at number 16 in Luke Brubaker, the tremendous defensive end from Wilfrid Laurier, who tests like a physical freak and has only played 3 years of football. So you know he has got loads of development left to do. He could be a potential ratio-breaking starter for you, a guy who I'm sure in a couple of years is going to get NFL interest if he doesn't stick with his minicamp invite with the New York Jets coming up here in a week or 2. He is a tremendous addition that you can add into the rotation with Mason Bennett and Anthony Federico off the edge. And then they just added solid depth special teams players along the way, right? Daniel Bell at 34 is an excellent player. Ryan Baker at 43. They get both UBC linebackers because they come back in round 8 and take Mitchell Townsend. Those guys may not have tested great, but they are the smartest players in the draft, and they're going to be exceptional on special teams. You get versatility with Jonathan Giustini, a guy who can play safety, play special teams, kick, punt, do kickoffs, do whatever you need there out of the University of Alberta. And John Cordes, who's a very solidly built center prospect, a great late-round flyer who spent a lot of time in the NCAA with Liberty. And finally, at 36, you also take a flyer on a pretty damn good running back in Matthew Peterson from Alberta if you want to switch the ratio there eventually. I thought the Ticats at every single spot hit on value and added people who can help them now and in the future.
I'll take this in a little bit of a different direction, fellas, because my favorite pick of the draft was the Saskatchewan Roughriders taking Nick Weeb. the outstanding linebacker out of the University of Saskatchewan in the second round. If this guy hadn't suffered an ACL injury on November 4th in the Hardy Cup semifinal loss the Huskies sustained to the Golden Bears, he'd easily be in the first round. And in my opinion, fellas, I think we'd be talking about him having the potential of Joel DeBlanco. This guy is that good, not just on the football field, but also as a human being. He's going to help Corey Mace change the culture in that locker room when he's healthy and potentially even before it. I think that was an absolute steal. He has all the makings of being a ratio-breaking starting linebacker in the CFL, and I just love this pick for the Saskatchewan Roughriders because of the connection with the Huskies, but also for Weeb. I think he is going to be an absolute star. I know he's born and raised in Alberta, just outside of Calgary, but this guy just has the feeling of a Sasky boy. And I think that when we look back on it, guys, mark it down in permanent Sharpie or pen or whatever you want. He is going to be the steal of this draft class where the Riders got him.
Well, and I know a lot of people were mocking him as late as round 3 or even round 4. So I was a little surprised to see the Riders take him at 12, but obviously they felt he was not going to be there when they took again at 23. And I mean, again, Dell Duncan Busby, phenomenal value at 23. So I think what they did was wise.
There's a couple of draft classes that left me scratching my head a little bit. I thought the Ottawa Redblacks didn't necessarily maximize the value they could have. I like Nick Mardner, but I thought Kevin Mattal was a better fit for them. I wonder if they'll come to regret that if he has a successful career with the Toronto Argonauts. But the big one, boys, and I think we have to talk about it, is the Edmonton Elks, because they smashed it out of the park with the first overall selection in Joel DeBlanco. And from there, it went on a path from curious to curiouser. And at the top of the second round, they confirm basically all of the rumors, and they take DK Bonham from South Alabama, the kid that allegedly, based on the rumors, they told not to show up to the Invitational Combine because they wanted to select him. Well, they go and take him way higher than anybody else had him on their boards. Then they go with Brad Haladic in their second pick in the second round. He's a kid who can play some fullback, tight end, is also a long snapper. At that point in time, he was the third long snapper on their roster, though that has since changed. Some quality linebacker depth in Olivier Moembe, and then they reach a little bit on Jackson Morgan in round 4, and then take the kicker from Laval as well at pick 31, a position that they don't need because they already have 2 kickers on the roster. And then go off the board with guys like Evan Ansiua from York, who not a lot of people had ranked, and Jacob Spencer from Saginaw Valley State, who quite frankly, at a very low level of NCAA competition, did not produce very much and tested absolutely horribly at that team's pro day. I was baffled by that selection in the 8th round. A lot of head scratchers here from Edmonton, guys.
Before we go on, I want to talk about my 2 mock drafts. My first mock draft, I had Nick Mardner at first overall, Joel DeBlanco at second overall. Those 2 ended up being flipped. On my second mock draft, which was done post-combine, I had DeBlanco at 1. I had Kevin Mattal at 2. He ended up going 5. I also had Mardner at 5. He ended up going 2. So I'm 3 picks away on those 2, but I got the positions right for both of those teams. I had Jeffrey Canton-Arcou at 3. I was 6 picks off. He went 9 to the Alouettes. I had Nathaniel Desmoulins-Duguay at 4. He ended up going 3 picks later to the Ticats. I had George Una at 6. That was bingo correct. I had Daniel Apoko to the Ticats at 7. He ended up going to the Red Blacks 4 picks later. I had Kyle Hergel at 8. He ended up going 5 picks earlier to Saskatchewan. And then I had Christian Kanu at 9. He ended up going to the Stampeders at 8, who traded up to get him. So of the players who I mocked in round 1, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them in the right round. The only player I missed on who was a first round pick was Ben LaBrosse, who I mocked at 10th overall. So if you'll indulge me, I would like to pat myself on the back just for a moment. I only got 2 of the 9 picks bang on correct, but I got 8 out of 9 in the proper round. And then in round 2, I was just a couple picks off on Kevin Claricius. I was just a couple picks off on Luke Brubaker. I got Gabe Wallace in the correct spot, just one away. Michael Krisak, I got the right team in the right round. So I'm pleased with my mock. I did not do a mock 3.0 because frankly there wasn't a lot I would have changed from mock 2.0, and I'm glad that decision aged well, because I've had years in the past where I make changes that I shouldn't have made, or I keep stuff the same that I should have changed, and it sucks after the draft. This year, I'm happy with it.
You should be, man. It's very tricky to do. Don't strain your shoulder there, patting yourself on the back. Make sure it can still reach your But I do think overall, Hodge, that the fact that you pegged so many of those guys in the first round or even the first round range is very well done, because there's so much smokescreen that goes on behind the scenes that people don't even know about when you're trying to get these things right. I saw some comments online. People were like, Hodge doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'm like, do you even understand how many hours that he's poured into this, days poured into this to try to get his rankings right? And some of it is how you feel the players are as well. But specifically when you do the mock draft, you're trying to peg these players in there. So you're not always going to get the exact player to the exact team. But the fact, as you said, that you had those guys laid out very close to the first round is an unbelievable job, especially with teams trying to knock you off your kilter, so to speak, with what they're going to do.
Appreciate it. And again, the goal is to get all 9 picks perfectly. I was far away from that, but not that far away. Maybe. The 2024 NFL Draft saw 4 Canadians selected, another 4 signed contracts as undrafted free agents, and 8 being invited to rookie mini camps. Which of these moves stood out the most to you, JC?
Well, let's be frank. There's only one answer to that question, and that is the Detroit Lions in the 4th round, trading a future 3rd-round pick to move up and snag Giovanni Manu, the massive left tackle from the University of British Columbia, making him the first U Sports player selected since David Onyemata in 2016. It was a bold move. It was earlier than a lot of people expected just a few weeks ago, and they gave up massive future asset to get him. That's telling about how much they like this kid and the opportunity he's going to get in Detroit. I think it was tremendous for Canadian football as a whole. It was tremendous for U Sports and for the University of British Columbia. Everyone can hang their hat on this kid going forward, and it's well deserved, because as we all know, he's an absolute physical freak with the right development in a place like Detroit where they value those big men, and he's going to get to learn from people like Penei Sewell and guys of that nature. I think his ceiling could be incredibly high.
The one that stood out most to me, guys, is the fact that Theo Benedette, his UBC teammate and bookend on that offensive line, was not selected in the NFL draft. What?
A travesty.
Definitely. And I thought that was going to have the chance for this class to tie the record of the year before for the most Canadians selected in a single NFL draft. But you talk about the resume that this kid has, not 1, but 2 most outstanding offensive lineman awards, let's just put it that way in CFL terms, in U Sports football, going down to the East-West Shrine game, grading out very well, as JC Abbott has noted multiple times. He is a guy to me that is not the exact same kind of footsteps as Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, but has that kind of upside. So when you look back, all the way back to when LDT was selected by the Chiefs in the 6th round of that draft, and compare them, I think Theo Benedette is further ahead, much more developed, and arguably similar athletes, if not Benedette having a bigger ceiling than LDT. Now, I know things have changed in the NFL drastically since Laurent Duvernay-Tardif was drafted. But I was stunned, especially after the Lions traded that future third to select Manu in the 4th round. I was like, okay, Theo Benedette's definitely getting drafted then too, because he's the more proven player who also has potential, I think, to get better. So that was a stunner to me. But in the same breath, just Chicago Bears, I think, got an absolute steal being able to sign this guy after the draft, and they paid up to do so. $100,000 USD in guaranteed money on that contract, $20,000 in the form of a signing bonus, $80,000 in the form of guaranteed base salary. And that will be very intriguing to see where Chicago uses him. And oh, by the way, he's going to have a shot to be protecting the guy that people think is a generational quarterback in Caleb Williams, who's going to get a lot of focus and tension there in the Windy City. So I know that behind the scenes with Sasha Gavami, Benedette's agent, he's been through this multiple times, and they try to select teams with his clients in the past, as most of the Canadian agents do, where it's the best fit to actually get on that roster. So I think Benedette has a great shot. He's going to have to go do it in training camp, but at least a decent start there to potentially earn a spot on the Bears roster.
The most surprising move to me was the quarterback move. We had a Canadian quarterback get signed in the NFL, Casey Bauman. Now, Canadian-American, grew up just south of the Canada-U.S. border in Sumas, Washington, but spent a lot of time in Abbotsford as a kid. Came to the CFL Combine out of Division II Augustana College. Had formerly played at Montana State as well. Only completed 59.5% of his pass attempts at the collegiate level, threw for 4,600 yards, 45 touchdowns, 16 picks, but did test well and is a huge, huge man. 6'6", 229 pounds. Not many collegiate players who can run and jump at that size. But did anybody expect Casey Bauman to get an NFL contract? That was the most shocking to me. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it
twice, and I didn't see it.
I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. Full credit to him. Go live your dream. Go be a Charger. That's amazing. But I thought that was the most shocking result of all this, because this is a guy who I don't think was going to get a realistic shot in the CFL as a quarterback.
Didn't get drafted.
It didn't get drafted. And now he's under contract with the NFL, which is amazing. Good for him. And by the way, that is something else that is an entire soapbox issue I don't even want to get into. But there are some players who are getting looks from the NFL, like a guy like Michael Herzog, running back who's a little undersized at 5'8", 201 pounds. He's going to rookie minicamp with the Detroit Lions. Now, he did get drafted, but there's speculation that with his lack of size, he's not really going to be a CFL running back. And it kind of pains you when there's guys who the NFL is going, yeah, I want him. Yeah, he looks like he can play. And then because they're Canadian, in a Canadian league, we're like, but he can't play fullback, so therefore, we don't want him. So maybe that'll change. I don't know, but it hasn't yet, unfortunately.
It should change. It's so bogus that so many of these Canadian athletes who play the, quote, skill positions don't get a realistic shot just because of their size or lack of weight. Like, we're talking about guys out here like Brandon Banks winning MOP in 2019. I'm not saying every U Sports receiver can be Brandon Banks, but my point is the Americans get those opportunities when they're undersized, especially, I would say, at the receiver, running back, and defensive back position. So let's wipe out this bias. Yes, I'm talking to you, all of the American personnel men and American coaches in the CFL, because the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have proven, and there have been some other teams as well, but specifically the Bombers, that you can play Canadians who are ultra successful, if not among the best or the best at their position in the league. Brady Oliveira, top among them. Retta Cramby playing Sam linebacker, right? They could play Tyrell Ford at corner. So I think that it's time to wipe out this BS bias. Just because a kid is Canadian doesn't mean that his size prevents him from potentially being an impact maker.
We should run down the other selections just so people are aware. In the 3rd round, the Arizona Cardinals took Isaiah Adams, the offensive lineman from Illinois, another former U Sports product as he transferred from Wilfrid Laurier. In round 4, shortly after Manu, Theo Johnson goes to the New York Giants. He's the outstanding tight end from Penn State. And then the last Canadian draft pick was Tanner McLaughlin, who went in the 6th round to the Cincinnati Bengals, the tight end from the University of Arizona. A lot of people saw him higher, but I guess he had core muscle surgery shortly before the draft and therefore was not going to be ready right away and fell as a result. Kyle Hergel gets signed by the New Orleans Saints. Aneem Donkwa gets his shot with the Philadelphia Eagles as a UDFA as well. And the other storyline from the NFL draft is Quantez Stiggers, who goes to the New York Jets in round 5, I believe, and is going to have a tremendous opportunity there as the reigning CFL Most Outstanding Rookie to make an impact at cornerback.
Recently retired defensive end Shawn Lemon has been suspended indefinitely by the CFL following an investigation that found he placed bets on games in 2021, including one in which he played. Hodge, is this going to cost Lemon a spot in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame?
I think it will. I think it's going to cost Lemon. I mean, it's already cost him possibly the rest of his playing career. That now it remains to be seen if he's going to try to get reinstatement, because it's pretty clear at this point that he retired to try to avoid this suspension. I think it's going to cost him potential future jobs in football. I believe that Lemon had aspirations to enter personnel. And it's a real shame because though I think, and I've certainly talked to Shawn Lemon. I know you guys have talked to Shawn Lemon over the years, been around him. He's a smart guy. But what he did here is unbelievably and fantastically stupid. Like, this was a very smart person making an unbelievably stupid decision. And it's possible that other people have done this, right? There's been no clarity from the league thus far as to how Lemon was caught. I will give full credit to you, JC, for being the one to push the league on this issue at Grey Cup in Hamilton in November 2023, asking about what will the possible ramifications be if a player is caught? The league does not have a concrete disciplinary structure at the moment for if a player is caught gambling. It's not clear if Lemon is suspended for life. Is he suspended indefinitely? Is he suspended for a period of time? We have no idea. But I also respect from the league side of it, they do not want to spell out how they're catching people betting on games, because, of course, by doing so, they could potentially create a way for players to avoid detection, right? If it would be like the cops saying, "Hey, here's the 5 places in the city we're monitoring for speeding, and we're not going to monitor anything else."
Well,
so,
I mean, there is 3 ways in which they're catching people. They have laid out in broad terms,
very broad terms. Yeah, do you want to go through them?
Yeah, there's an algorithm. Essentially, it's run by a branch of Genius Sports that focuses on this. It's similar exactly to how the NFL does it. In fact, I think it's run. Genius also helps the NFL in this aspect, and they essentially check betting trends and things like that to identify red flags when it comes to CFL games or betting trends therein, to flag problematic betting. So there's the algorithm aspect being run by Genius. They also have an anonymous tip line that players can come in that's run independently. So if somebody has heard about somebody gambling on a CFL game who shouldn't be, you can call in to that independent tip line and they will take that information and run it up the food chain so that the CFL can investigate it. And then the third avenue is that all of these sports books have their own ways of investigating red flags in betting, trying to identify problematic wagers and things like that from people who may have inside information. Now, it depends on the jurisdiction or the sports book in terms of how much that they are legally obligated to report or how much that they want to report to the league. But they can also come forward to the CFL and say, hey, we've flagged this wager from an account that's linked to a CFL player. It looks like it may be an illicit wager. You should look into this. So via those 3 avenues, they have the capacity to identify problematic bets and investigate them further.
And kudos to you for laying that out. My point is more, it's not like there is and I'm sure internally there is, but it's not like the CFL is going to publicize, well, bets over this amount or bets placed within this specific time period, right? The answer is pretty broad. Well, we use algorithms to detect potentially harmful bets. What does that mean? I have an approximate idea of what that might mean, but I think the CFL has been wise to not go into extremely minute detail, which would potentially allow players to place bets. But at the end of the day, getting back to Lemon, I mean, this was deeply disappointing. And the CFL, and I know some people have said, well, the sports betting is everywhere, these days, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Unlike some professional leagues, the CFL actually allows its players to bet on literally any other league than the CFL. Like, there are leagues that have policies that forbid players from engaging in sports betting of any kind. The CFL is not like that. You can bet on literally any other sport, any other league. You just can't bet on your own stuff. So to me, there is literally no excuse for this type of behavior. And it's unfortunate for Lemon that these consequences, as much as they're earned, are going to cloud over what was a great career, right? Like 2 weeks ago, we sat on the show post-retirement and we sung Lemon's praises for 10, 15 minutes. And it's awful that this has, unfortunately, going to cloud his legacy, so to speak.
Yeah, the unfortunate reality is that he was always going to be a bubble guy for the Hall of Fame based on a number of other elements of his career. And this may just simply take him out of contention. Unlike a guy like Andrew Harris, who has a prominent suspension in his background, but has the statistics that overwhelm it and didn't necessarily have a reputation of bouncing around from team to team and not really being wanted everywhere that he played. Shawn Lemon was already up against some of that stigma when it came to being on the Hall of Fame fringes. And now this could unfortunately be a death blow for that particular dream. I know it's been reported out there that the wager was small, only 70 euros. He bet on his team to win, all these things. And people say, well, that doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things. It's not that big a deal. But this is a hard and fast rule. There is no gray area here. You have never, ever been allowed to bet on your own league and on your own games in professional sports for a number of reasons. A, because you don't want to incentivize people to throw games. But B, even if you're betting on yourself, you could potentially go into debt. Now you may be trying to play catch up, and it will incentivize you to throw games in the future. So you don't want that optically as a pro sports league. You need to protect the integrity of the game. And as much as the policy for the CFL has shifted and become more front facing over the last year, they've made initiatives to ensure that everyone in the league has to take an educational course on sports betting and the potential rule infractions in that area. It's always been against the law, and everybody knew that in all of pro sports, literally everywhere. There is no excuse for Lemon's behavior here in my mind, and I have absolutely zero sympathy for him for taking this action.
It was based on my sourcing one bet on a 2-game parlay for 70 euros. And JC, you alluded to it there with performance-enhancing drugs. We're talking about the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, or legacy brings about a difficult decision in terms of what's worse, PEDs, or in this instance, one bet placed on your team to win, because this is kind of some of the stuff we're going to get into when we're talking about who should or shouldn't be in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame.
Well, let's be frank. That's what we know of this particular situation. We don't know what hasn't been flagged, because Lemon's not the only CFL player who's ever bet on his own games. He's the first to ever be suspended by it, because we are just at the peak of them trying to identify these things. But, I mean, we don't know if there were other bets placed through other means that haven't been identified. We know what Lemon would say, and he would say this was a one-time thing. But we have no idea how often he or other players have been betting at this stage. It could be a much larger issue. We just know.
Yeah, I just don't think you can throw that out there, though, as a blanket
Well,
statement. Right? That's unfair. We have to stick to the facts.
Well,
and that's what I was going with the argument is when we're talking about PEDs versus what we know as the facts, let's stick to the facts, just like the Chad Kelly case. What are we talking about when it comes to the Canadian Football Hall of Fame? You can't throw a blanket statement over that, because then you could do that for a bunch of players, right? You could talk about, are there cases where the league has just swept things under the rug that never got out publicly for this, that, or the other reason? Like, we cannot do that, JC. I'm sorry, dude. We cannot start casting aspersions like that, because you're going to open a massive can of worms.
I'm not trying to say that there's a massive conspiracy here. I'm saying the reason why that one bet is important and that you come down so harshly on it is because it is so difficult to identify that you don't know how deep it goes. So we know for a fact that it's happened once, right? And we don't know if it's ever happened again. I'm not claiming that.
But again, you're going down this rabbit hole, dude. We don't know how many guys that have been caught one time for performance-enhancing drugs in any sport were actually using it throughout their entire career.
And we don't. But for
let's stick to the facts and answer the question of what is worse in your view.
For me, it's betting.
PEDs or betting?
I don't care about PEDs. I frankly do not care.
I think that's a crazy opinion to have.
But you're talking about the integrity of the sport in both instances, and you don't care about somebody cheating?
Everybody cheats. Like, there are ways that you can.
What do you mean everybody cheats? That's another blanket statement that you should not be making.
Everybody cheats. I mean, that's sports, right? Like, there's competitive things that you do that are outside.
You cannot make that as a blanket statement.
I will interject here to say that I don't believe any player who has bet on games or who has tested positive for PEDs belongs in the Hall of Fame. That is my personal opinion. I don't particularly care if one is supposedly worse or better than the other. I think they are both completely unacceptable forms of behavior. I also would call into question if a player who was found guilty of something untoward in their personal life should be in the Hall of Fame. That's more of a gray area because it's not at all football related, right? But if somebody were to be found guilty of some type of domestic violence, I think that calls into question. Even if they were the supposedly best player in CFL history, should they be in the Hall of Fame? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know the answer to for myself is any player who tested positive for PEDs or any player who bet on games does not belong in the Hall of Fame.
For me, PEDs are slightly different because yes, and you can have the moral and ethical debate there, right? And I think it's incredibly dumb to do any form of PEDs because it negatively impacts your own body. But the reality is everyone in the league is trying to improve their own performance in some ways. And there are gray areas there, and there's all sorts of things that happen in that nature, ways that guys get a competitive edge. For me, PEDs are something that's happening in the end goal of always winning. The risk with betting, even if you're betting on your own team to win to start, is you open yourself up to a situation in which you're going to be put at risk, right? Where the integrity of whether or not you're trying to win is going to be called into question based on what your debts might be or what those wagers may end up being.
But the integrity of the game gets called into question if you have everybody now doing performance-enhancing drugs and improving their performance above and beyond what it would be naturally.
Integrity is not in question if everyone's doing it.
No, but I'm saying, like, this is what you're saying is like, well, it's okay to do PEDs.
I would not advise anyone to do that. I just don't think – I think it gets overblown as an ethical and moral thing that, like, to me, PEDs are not the worst possible thing that someone could do, right? Like, I'm not going to hold that against someone as much as I would hold off the field poor behavior or things of that nature. Like PEDs, everyone is trying to cheat in some way, whether it's in the play, holding or doing this or getting away with rules, or whether it's off the field trying to find something that gives you a competitive edge. Everyone's doing it. Some people just go into areas, whether knowingly or unknowingly, that gives them a different type of edge. And
if you're a professional football out there, JC thinks that you cheated to get into your profession.
I mean, everyone cheats at something. Like that's the real. That's why we have penalties.
Don't be calling me a cheater. I don't want to speak for Hodge either.
Anytime someone commits a penalty on the field, they're cheating.
On some level, an offensive tackle that grasps a jersey for that like extra half second to try to, stop the defensive end from destroying their quarterback in some way is cheating. I don't think that is a completely unreasonable assessment of the situation. Should that be considered on the level of taking PEDs? The answer is obviously not, and I don't think that comparing the two is remotely productive.
JC, I'm sorry. You got to stop going down the rabbit hole, bro. This is the integrity of the game on both accounts. And I would argue, I don't know where I'm settling on this question, but somebody betting on themselves to win, if I had to pick one of the two, I would rather have a clean athlete and somebody betting on themselves than I would rather have the person betting on themselves to win.
I'd rather have him juiced up. I'm sorry. I'd rather have him juiced up. I really would. I think that's far more. There's far more integrity in that than placing a wager on a game.
I think
how is there more integrity in that?
I think that's a crazy.
You're breaking the rules that have suspendable offenses.
You're breaking the rules in both scenarios. So I mean, they're equal in terms of breaking the rules. I'm just saying.
But you're not saying that they're equal.
No, I'm not.
You're saying it's okay to break the rules and push the limits with PEDs, but it's not okay to break the rules.
If it's against the rules, it's against the rules. That's the reality. But what I'm saying is, if given the choice equally between the two, right, the only one that threatens the integrity of the result, right, ultimately in the long term, is wagering on games.
No, PEDs threatens the integrity of the result for the individual who is taking those drugs to perform better on the field than they otherwise could have.
It's like everyone is trying to be at peak physical performance.
So what you're saying is
you're not allowed to use PEDs.
Okay. So what you're saying is,
and how many guys
someone
don't
betting
get
on themselves? But this is not about getting caught and not getting caught. That's not what this conversation is about, because we do not know who is not getting caught. It's possible that every player who's ever taken PEDs in the CFL has been caught. It's also possible that only a very small fraction. We don't know that, and I don't think it's productive to talk about things we don't know and speculate. True. I also think it's silly to suggest that it's not that big of a deal if a player takes PEDs to run faster and jump higher and be more explosive, but it's way, way worse for them to bet on their team to win and then play extra motivated to try to win. I think that's silly. What I will say and reiterate is I think there should be very little appetite for either of them. I think they're both wrong. The only thing I will say that's interesting is we have a very strict policy for PEDs where it's a suspension and then you're back, and there is currently no policy for betting. One should argue Shawn Lemon should play in the CFL again. Should he make the Hall of Fame? My answer is no. To me, this rules him out. But it doesn't seem necessarily fair that a player can take PEDs and then be back on the field 3 weeks later. Whereas with betting, it seems like you just get chucked out.
That's fair. And I think there needs to be a laid out framework like the NFL has in terms of this type of bet results in this type of suspension, and this type of bet results in indefinite suspension, and this type of bet results in you being out of the league entirely.
Hodge is so sick of this conversation. He's gone. So let's keep it moving. I'll read Hodge's heritage moment. On this day in 2001, Arlen Bruce III signed with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The enigmatic receiver caught 115 passes for 1,880 yards and 19 touchdowns over 2 seasons with the team, leading to an NFL opportunity with the San Francisco 49ers. Bruce returned to the CFL with Toronto in 2003 and remained a productive receiver until his final season with the Alouettes in 2013, retiring with 11,609 receiving yards and 94 touchdowns. The Kansas native was fined several times throughout his career, with offenses ranging from wearing a Spider-Man mask to celebrate a touchdown, should never be fined for that, to posting a homophobic comment directed at Michael Sam on social media, should be fined for that. Though an official reason was never given by the league, it's worth noting that his son, Arland Bruce IV, pleaded guilty to underage gambling while playing at Iowa, where he was accused of placing 132 wagers, including 19 on games in which he played. He was actually allowed to sign a contract, JC.
Well, he didn't do something serious like PEDs, Dunk.
Well, I believe they voided that contract now. He signed initially.
Yeah, but he actually signed it and registered it.
They did, yeah. And then they quietly removed that once, I believe, a number of outlets, including ourselves, made that the headline of the story instead of the fact that he was Arland Bruce's son, which, quite frankly, it should have been the headliner when he signed. Notice that the Edmonton Elks did not include that in the press release when they announced the signing. You had to do a little bit of digging for that particular information.
Hodge, are you okay?
Yes, thank you for reading Hodge's heritage moment. An Amazon delivery driver opened the front door to my home without my consent, and I had to go make sure that I wasn't about to be assaulted or robbed.
Jesus, man.
Yes. If you're an Amazon delivery driver, listen to this podcast. Please do not randomly open the door to people's homes. That is not good. Don't do that. Don't do that. You could do PEDs. Just ask JC. But you can't open. But you can't open the door to people's homes. Please don't do that.
Let's go to the 3-minute drill, fellas. The Edmonton Elks will broadcast every home game in Punjabi as part of a historic radio deal. It's a smart initiative, ain't it?
It's a very smart initiative. If the CFL wants to have a long and successful run, they need to do a better job of engaging new Canadians and fans who will call maybe not from traditional CFL backgrounds. I think this is super smart. Canadian linebacker Charlie Moore has retired at the age of 26. Is that a big loss for the Stamps?
I think it's a substantial loss for special teams, although they've revamped that team a little bit through the draft. But Moore was a player I loved coming out, a South Delta kid. I saw him in high school. I saw him in college. I thought he was going to have a long career as a special teamer. Showed some flashes, but steps away early. The Saskatchewan Roughriders have signed former U Sports All-Canadian defensive back Catley Joseph. Is that a strong addition?
It has a potential to be. He finished his career at the University of Saskatchewan after, I believe, starting his collegiate career at the University of Maine. Fellas, is that right?
That's correct.
Yes.
And I thought was, really good at both schools. So I think he's a dude that is worth keeping an eye on at Riders training camp. Football Canada has added former CFL general manager Jo-Anne Polak to its board of directors. Is that a great get?
It is. Jo-Anne is a trailblazer, and I think that is an organization that needs a little more leadership on its board. They're going through some turbulent times. I think she is somebody who can help still those waters. The Edmonton Elks selected linebacker Ativa Mauga-Clements with the first overall pick in the 2024 CFL Global Draft. Was he the best player available?
He was the best player available right now. He ended up being number 2 on my global player rankings. Number 1 is Julius Welchoff, the freakish defensive lineman from Michigan and later Charlotte, who went to the Calgary Stampeders in the second round. He's got an NFL opportunity with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think you can throw Thomas Yasmin, the Australian tight end from Utah, in that mix as well. He went one pick later at 14 to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, but he'll get some time with the Denver Broncos first. Both of those guys are physical freaks, but Mauga Clements is going to come in right now and be a core special teamer for you. Riders GM Jeremy O'Day revealed Canadian DB Jackson Ford underwent off-season wrist surgery and could miss the start of this season. Would that be a costly loss?
It could be. That dude is a menace on teams. I think has some upside as a starter, but hopefully if he does miss any time, it's just a couple of games at the start of the season. Longtime CFL player and executive Lyle Bauer passed away on Tuesday at the age of 65. What are your thoughts on his passing?
Well, growing up in Winnipeg, you always knew about the Never Alone Foundation, founded in 2004 by Bauer when he was diagnosed with throat cancer, which honestly is possibly even greater as a part of his legacy than what he accomplished as a CFL player, winning 3 Grey Cups and being a president and CEO of 2 different clubs for a stretch of well over a decade. Rest in peace, Lyle Bauer, and all best to his family and friends. The Elks traded long snapper Peter Ajay to the Ottawa Redblacks in exchange for a 3rd-round pick in the 2025 CFL Draft. Is that a good move for both sides?
It's a great move for the Red Blacks because they didn't have a legitimate proven snapper on their roster up until they made this trade. But for the Edmonton Elks, just head-scratching decisions here. They drafted the top long snapper in the draft 3 years in a row, going with Brad Haladic this year. So they'll have 2 guys to compete for this role here. But they drafted Haladic in the 2nd round in order to justify a trade that gets them a 3rd rounder next year. That doesn't make any sense, gentlemen. So
that's what you call Chris Jones math.
I don't think that's great asset management for the Edmonton Elks as a franchise. The Toronto Argonauts have finally named replacements for Corey Mace, with Kevin Iben and William Fields being named co-defensive coordinators. Does that make sense?
Not really. I'll give the Argos the benefit of the doubt because they've been so good in recent years. But when was the last time a team named co-coordinators, fellas? Do you remember?
It's a joke. I don't. Was it Ottawa after Jamie Elizondo left? Yeah, I don't know.
On offense, and how did that work out?
Here's a little secret for the Argos, and this is going to sound mean because, and it's probably not fair because, as you mentioned, Doug, they've been so successful. But whoever's calling the plays, that's the defensive coordinator. So yes. One of these 2 guys is going to call the plays. They're the defensive coordinator, and none of this nonsense. I'm sorry.
No, you got to have one guy. If I had to suspect what's going to happen here, William Fields has a defensive background. Kevin Iben obviously played linebacker at a high level in this league, so perhaps he manages the front. So it could lean Iben, but guess what? One of the questions is going to be at training camp. Who's the guy actually calling the defensive plays?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that question is asked because then we will know the identity of the Toronto Argonauts defensive coordinator. On that note, we thank you as always for listening to the 3 Down Nation podcast. We will be back next week for another episode.